should I sit?
Yes.
Steamy in here. Can I put those here?
Yep.
Oh, thanks. There. Thank you so much. For you, madam, and anybody else. I mean, I don't know. Sure. Are you good? And you guys, my cards. Okay, this one's for Terry. Hey, Terry.
This is Ted, right? Yes.
Ted, I don't know if you remember me. I'm Michelle.
Reach to the screen to go up all room one.
The Cap Hill area.
Hi.
Yeah, I'm at Park.
Yes, I have a few of these.
I got lucky.
If I hit that button, I'm gonna sit down. I tell you we're sitting down. We're sitting down. Do you want to stand with me?
Yeah, it's your conference, so you tell us where you want us and how you want us.
Yeah.
It's really too bad we can't all
Can I
be
just set it
behind
near
them.
me?
It would be better if you held it, but
Okay.
just pass the mic along.
Okay, perfect.
You need a mic stand.
I know.
Will you
You
count
want
us
one more
down
just to
before
get
you begin?
Pardon?
Will you count us down before you begin? We're gonna try to live stream it.
Okay.
It's like 3, 2, 1.
Stream of consciousness, perfect.
Is this a good setup? Do you want us, like, no?
I think we're good. I mean, we're just sort of, I'm not trying to be too formal about
Okay,
all
okay.
of that. Oh, thank you. Did you, and I've got, there are cards floating around for me.
Do we all have our phones on mute?
Everybody, yeah,
All
everybody
right.
on silent?
Thank you, Michelle.
Eat a cookie, that way you'll be silent.
Not me.
Not standing on ceremony there. It's hardly on time. What time is it? 11:30. 11:30. On the money. Okay. Are we ready?
This is a question for you. Yes.
Been ready. All right. We'll start now. Okay. Thank you very much for coming this morning. My name is Pat Mellen. I'm an environmental attorney, and I am a sole practitioner at Pat Mellen Law. And I am here on behalf of 7 concerned community groups who have long-standing concerns about the safety of Rocky Flats. This morning we filed a petition with the Federal District Court, District of Colorado, to request disclosure of certain grand jury documents that were provided, or special documents provided to the special federal grand jury 89-2, which was impaneled after the raid at Rocky Flats to investigate criminal environmental activities by the contractor there at the time was Rockwell International. The documents that were provided that we are seeking are both public documents and business documents. Documents are created in the routine course of Rockwell's business, of Dow's business, and provided to the grand jury either under subpoena as part of depositions or through other searches or voluntary submissions. We are not seeking confidential materials gathered by the grand jury during its actual operation. So not transcripts, not depositions, not deliberation notes, not anything that is specifically limited to materials created especially for the grand jury. That distinction is important. Federal Rules of Criminal Procedure, Rule 6, is what seals grand jury documents and makes them unavailable. It's a protection of the grand jury system, which is important to the function and operation of the criminal justice system, which is why documents that are provided to it are held under seal to protect the interests of witnesses who are called or may be called later because of the nature of the proceedings. However, because this grand jury ended decades ago, because these documents would have been created under routine business circumstances anyway. There are exceptions to Rule 6 that permit their disclosure in the proper circumstances. We believe those circumstances exist here. The grand jury documents are being sought preliminary to litigation. We've reached a stalemate in this region between the advocates for economic and other development at or near the refuge and the community groups who believe that that economic development is not safe yet. And so we're seeking the disclosure of this information in order to audit the cleanup that happened, the risk assessment that followed it, and the determination that the refuge portion of that property is actually safe for unlimited use and unrestricted exposure. While that may be true for the Superfund purposes that it was calculated for, we believe that that designation is being misused and extended for other purposes that the fundamental parameters that were used to calculate it don't support. So I'm going to turn it over to the groups who actually are the petitioners here. So before I do that, I'm going to ask John Lipsky, who is to my left, who is a former federal Bureau of Investigation investigator, to talk a little bit about this experience.
Hi, my name is John Lipsky, and I was the affiant of 2 search warrants at Rocky Flats in June of 1989. I was also the principal lead investigator for the criminal investigation of Rockwell at Rocky Flats that concluded in 1992, and I was a subject matter expert witness for the plaintiffs in Cook versus Rockwell. You know, it's been 30 years this October or August 1st that the grand jury was impaneled, and make no mistake, the government did not want the documents to see the light of day. And I think that's bolstered by the fact that with the publication of the Ambush Grand Jury nonprofit nonfiction book, in 2004, then Congressman Mark Udall asked the EPA, the Department of Energy, and CDPHE to refute the allegations in the book, and that was not done. And to even take it further, then U.S. Attorney John Suthers offered to show his files, and if necessary was going to get the motion before the court to release the information if it was concerning grand jury material. And there were no the offer was made, there were no takers, and I'm just very hopeful that Ms. Mellen and the plaintiffs that have caused this action will be able to secure a positive approval from the court without opposition. But I really am worried that there will be opposition because, like I say, 30 years ago these documents were not meant to see the light of day. And my hat's off to these community organizations for doing this. We have at least five imminent threats that are about to occur out at Rocky Flats or in the adjacent area, and with the refuge never being remediated, neither were the off-site lands. How many more people have to be subjected to the threats? And I thank you very much.
So I'd like to turn this over now to Tiffany Hansen, who is the representative of the Downwinders.
Hi, my name is Tiffany Hansen, and I'm the director of Rocky Flats Downwinders, a nonprofit community group advocating on behalf of those people negatively impacted by living near the former Rocky Flats nuclear weapons plant. I have heard personally from hundreds of citizens over the past 5 years who believe their health problems have been caused by living near Rocky Flats. In addition, on November 28, 2018, the current and longtime head of Jefferson County Health Department, Dr. Mark Johnson, spoke publicly of his concerns regarding whether the area near Rocky Flats is safe, his distrust of the Department of Energy, and his concerns about the supposed cleanup of Rocky Flats. We share in the distrust and believe it is time for the public to know what the grand jury knows about the scope and nature of the admitted contamination that occurred both on and off-site the plant and its impact on the health of those living nearest Rocky Flats. We will not rest until the truth is revealed to the public and an independent, comprehensive health study is finally conducted of the downwind population. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And now I'd like to turn it over to Terry Berry, who is here by Skype. So I'm not sure the best technology to use for that, but Terry is with us from Craig, Colorado. She represents the Alliance of Nuclear Workers Advocacy Groups. Terry, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Okay, the floor is yours.
Okay, well, good morning, and thank you for inviting me. My name is Terry Barry, and I'm a founding member of the Alliance of Nuclear Worker Advocacy Groups and co-petitioner for to include the Rocky Flats facility in the special exposure cohort. Rocky Flats workers or their survivors are automatically compensated if a worker developed one of the 22 specified cancers and worked for 250 days before December 31st, 1983. The petitioner and I, as well as many Rocky Flats workers, fought long and hard to get the SEC class extended past 1983. Many former workers came forward with their oral testimony about their experiences at Rocky Flats, and some even offered sworn affidavits. Judy Padilla, in fact, often stressed the importance of the grand jury's report during her public testimony. But this was not enough to convince the Advisory Board on Radiation and Worker Health that the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health could not reconstruct dose with reasonable accuracy after 1983. We lacked the smoking gun documentation to prove our case. That evidence may be included in the documents given to the Rocky Flats grand jury. Because this documentation is sealed, the SEC petitioners cannot research them to find the supporting documentation needed to expand coverage for the sick workers who develop cancer. Access to these documents is vital. I want to express my deep appreciation to Patricia Mellen for the hard work she's put in pursuing this righteous petition, to John Lipsky for his unwavering support for the sick Rocky Flats workers, to Tiffany Hansen for her courage in raising the issue of possible exposure to the community, and to all the other advocates who have spent decades educating the public about Rocky Flats: Leroy, Judith, Alicia, Michelle, Dale, Bonnie, and Paula. My deep appreciation for your efforts to get the truth out. Thank you.
Thanks, Terry. All right, so I just want to go back and clarify a little bit and make sure that we introduce all of our petitioners. Terry Berry is with the Alliance of Nuclear Workers Advocacy Groups. Tiffany with the Rocky Flats, Rocky Flats Downwinders. Alicia and Michelle with CANDELAS Glows and Rocky Flats Glows. Dale, I don't think has been able to join us from the Rocky Flats Neighborhood Association. Paula Ellefson Gardine from Environmental Information Network, EIN. And Bonnie Graham from Rocky Flats Right to Know. And the Rocky Mountain Peace and Justice Center is also participating but unable to join us today. As John mentioned, the 5 immediate threats we are hoping to address at the Rocky Flats site are the Parkway, Jefferson Parkway, that is intended to run along the eastern edge corridor, the Rocky Mountain Greenway, which was rerouted as a high-speed adventure bike trail through Rocky Flats. The build-out of the trail system at Rocky Flats, which is greatly changed from the trail plan that was approved in 2005 with a robust public involvement process. The Rocky Flats Visitor Center, which has morphed from a modest visitor contact station into some $8.3 million behemoth in a completely different location on the refuge. I think what took us all a little bit by surprise in November and December were the fracking permits that were applied for underneath the refuge. We believe that if the public knew as much as we do about the history and the cleanup and the decisions and determinations that have been made, that they would feel differently and be more concerned about those activities and many others that will come to the table when we end up talking about this in front of the court. It is our goal to keep the information in front of the public, in front of the decision makers, in front of the courts, to make sure that a greenwashing of the site doesn't happen. As time passes, memory fades, people move on. This is not your average parcel of land. It's not clean. It met the standards that were set at the time after much dispute and debate and funding issues with Congress, but it's not clean, and it's not the average parcel of land. And so our goals are to obtain the source documents that we believe will help us determine how best to use that determination, if at all, by the federal agencies and CDPHE, that safe isn't safe. For the Superfund purposes, it may be safe for unrestricted exposure, unlimited use and unrestricted exposure. That's their math, that's their sampling, that's their modeling. That process is what they believe, based on all of the work that they do at this and other sites, is the right way to assess that information. Whether that's valid for continuing development in localized places on that refuge property is what we dispute. We intend to obtain the documents to prove the real situation and how best to use that determination. So, questions at all? We have copies of the filing right there behind Ms. Berry if you'd like copies, or if you leave me your email address on the yellow pad, we'll be happy to email them to you. Any questions for me or anyone else at the table?
I understand that there's currently a lawsuit filed by the Town of Superior. How is this different from that lawsuit?
Great question. So there are two pending lawsuits. We'll talk about Town of Superior first. Town of Superior has filed a NEPA lawsuit, also in federal court, based on parameters within NEPA that require that if you substantially change a project or you are doing a project over a long period of time, you can't piecemeal what's called a National Environmental Policy Act evaluation. That lawsuit and the suit filed by Randall Weiner with several of these same organizations is what's called a NEPA suit under the Administrative Procedures Act. It is limited to reviewing the information that was available to the agencies at the time their decision was made. This lawsuit cannot provide additional information to those suits because of because they are of the nature of Administrative Procedure Act cases.
And that's for both of those two?
Both of those cases. So, other questions? Anyone else? I do. Yes.
Do you hope that what documents you acquire from the grand jury will be limited in scope specifically to worker compensations claims, or is there a chance that other documentation may, in other words, how limited do you think the retrieval will be?
We would like to review all of the documents to determine if they relate to contamination on that property. So while worker interests are an important piece of this, what we're really looking for are records related to contamination, whether it was process related, disposal related, accidental, incidental, It's whatever hazardous substances were used on that property for whatever reason and where they ended up. I had this question come up yesterday as well. It's difficult to say of all of the documents that are there, what will apply to this or not. I would tell you my experience in researching this topic for the last 2.5 years is that as I go looking for one thing, I find one thing and 4 others I was not anticipating that may be under a different title, may be under a different author or an unexpected exhibit to something else. So it's very difficult to say specifically without actually reviewing the document whether it would apply to the hazardous substances out there. So, other questions?
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
So we feel like this is a really historical moment.
Okay.
And I wonder if you want to speak at all to what this means historically and maybe even nationwide, and why this isn't just maybe even localized to Rocky Flat. Like, what's the historical context of this?
I'm not entirely sure what you mean. Do you want? Why don't you? So what you
Just knowing
give your
the history
perspective
of the site, for us it's a really big deal that we have these sealed documents, a grand jury that was silenced, and just these documents that it's been very important in the past to be sealed. And when they were sealed, as John Lipsky said, they were sealed in perpetuity. This was supposed to stick. And so just sort of speaking about what it means for us to be able to open them, and also from our perspective, we kind of wanted to make sure we say that we don't want to open them just so that we can like blame somebody or point fingers. Really what we're trying to do is get information and move forward from the point that we're at now. So I'm not sure that really helps, but just
tell
trying
us all
to
your
speak to you know, just the importance, how momentous this feels for us. So I'm Michelle Gabriel Parrish. I'm with CANDELAS Glows. Yeah.
This cleanup, this site, this issue is personal to many people in this community. And the sealing of grand jury documents, you'll see in the pleading if you read it, one of the aspects of a grand jury is that documents can go there to die, basically. Because of the sealing nature of a grand jury, documents submitted to it are generally considered sealed, as Michelle said, forever. We are seeking information. It is long past the point of blame or holding accountable. Rockwell pled guilty to 10 environmental crimes. They paid a fee at the time, or a penalty at the time that was a record. It no longer is, but it's 30 years later. So it's not about blame, and it's not about pointing fingers or being right. We have a site that is in a state that it is in today, however it got there. We have to be responsible stewards and make responsible decisions about what happens at that site in the future. To do that, we need to know what's really there and where it really is. I like to say that Rocky Flats is not a math problem. It's not a story problem. It's not a statistics thesis in college. It's a living, breathing site that affects everyone in the community. And while that statistical modeling that was done for a specific purpose related to the Superfund designation was done with the best knowledge available at the time. It, or maybe not, but so what I want to avoid is we're not going to get into whether the cleanup standards were agreed to or whether, you know, there's malfeasance on anyone's part. What we want to focus on at this point is, were all of the sites properly identified and characterized, and do they still pose a threat because there was no remediation on the refuge? We have to keep saying that. The CDPHE and the documents related to the site openly acknowledge there was never any remediation on the site. So, we need to know where materials still live. We need to know that while the CDPHE and the EPA and DOE have stated that they feel the site as it sits today is safe. Well, and again, I'm being specific in how I say that. Well, they say that that is true. We believe that based on this, if you take that information in the context of the standards, that below 6 feet, any contamination was left unremediated and uncontained. So, if I took, I'm known as a bottle of water, if I took, can I have that bottle of water for a moment? If I took this bottle of water and said it was plutonium, and I wanted to bury it 7 feet under your garden, and I told you it's probably gonna be fine, would you let me do it? Would that be okay with you? And that's really what we're talking about, is it's the standard at Rocky Flats was 6 feet and under was left unremediated. If you look at Bonnie's t-shirt, it tells you the standards for what was allowed, and that's the Rocky Flats cleanup agreement. So we're not gonna debate the standards. What I do know is that they tell me that individual locations on the refuge still have contamination. Kaiser Hill admits that. There are hot spots on the refuge. They are documented. The sampling that was done to clear the refuge was done 5 samples for every 30 acres. Those samples were averaged, and those averages were averaged, and everyone thought that was good. And that's openly documented in the Kaiser Hill paperwork, Kaiser Hill documentation, the multi-volume, thousands of pages of information, and we cite to it in the pleading. The question is, that site-wide determination won't be any comfort. If someone doing specific construction, digging more than 6 feet under a particular piece of ground, or where something was left buried, hits a contaminated piece of equipment, hits a 55-gallon drum, hits something that didn't just magically happen to be that one of those 5 samples. So we're looking for the information to be able to assess the refuge in order to manage it appropriately and to talk about whether this site-wide determination should apply beyond the Superfund determination. So.
Question.
Yes.
Terry, I got a question for you.
Yes, sir.
Please explain why the special exposure cohort for the workers basically ends in 1983 when Rocky Flats workers worked out there until about 2006.
Well, it's because NIOSH convinced the advisory board they have the expertise to reconstruct dose using the workers' bioassays, badge readings, things of that nature. The petitioner and I and Rocky Flats workers disagree with that. I'll give you a good, for instance, on the documents that we are seeking and how it can help possibly expand this SEC. And it's a theoretical example. One of the issues is tritium exposure to the workers. We know there was a release back in 1973 and 1974. It's well documented. The workers who came forward to tell the board that tritium was released all the time and tritium alarms went off all the time. The documents that the grand jury has that are sealed could possibly have information or an incident report of where the tritium, if there was additional releases into the atmosphere and into the community. So that's just one example of how we could use documentation for the SEC.
Terry?
And also you have to remember that the workers were exposed environmentally. I mean, they work there. So if they're walking back and forth across a piece of land where the drum is buried only 3 feet, you know, and it's being released, they're affected that way also.
Terry, can I interrupt you for a second?
Sure.
Will you please explain what tritium is and how it...
Tritium is a radioactive gas that is hydrogen, right, Dale?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's radioactive hydrogen.
Hydrogen-3.
Hydrogen-3, yes.
Don't forget that they had massive releases to Great Western Reservoir, and it was demonstrated in the residents' urine of Broomfield. So it wasn't just workers that were exposed, the community was exposed.
Right.
So one of the challenges of this petition is limiting it to those things that are immediate. There are other applications beyond the 5 imminent threats that we have mentioned in this petition. The workers' interests, the downwinders' interests, the prescribed burns that were avoided in 2012, 15. Prescribed burns are still on the table. The breaching of the solar terminal ponds. So this petition could have been a book. We tried to avoid that because people's eyes glaze over, understandably so, about how the site has been contaminated and remediated. And unfortunately that works against us because it's hard to put this succinctly into layman's terms about why concerns still exist.
You talked about earlier how this is very deeply personal to the people very involved in that community. I guess more broadly, why should people across Colorado care about this?
Why should people across Colorado care?
We're all downwinders.
Future generations.
It's a vacation spot. People are gonna be going there to visit. You know, when you look at the map of Colorado and you say, I'm gonna be in Colorado, I'm gonna be on the Front Range for 5 days, what should I look at? Rocky Flats should not be on that list. And it also sets a huge precedent for turning other waste sites into wildlife
Rocky Flats has been
refuges.
used as a model
Yes.
for how they can greenwash one of the worst sites in the country and do it at other DOE sites across the United States and convince the public that it's harmless, and it's not.
What are some other examples of sites like this across the country?
Fernald is one.
Fernald, Ohio, Hanford,
Santa Susana Field Lab in Los Angeles.
Coldwater Creek in St. Louis, Mound,
Yes, oh yes,
Yep.
Mound.
Mound in Ohio, Savannah River.
Georgia.
So weapons to wildlife is a moniker for that concept of turning these sites that were part of the military complex into wildlife refuges managed by the Fish and Wildlife Service.
Originally, it was meant to keep the public out. And they converted that to, let's have them recreate. They can convince the public that there's nothing wrong there and that it can have unlimited use. They can do anything they want. They don't have to sequester waste. They don't have to clean up a site. They just need to convince people that it's fine. And all their studies are based on the adult white male, not the susceptible women and children.
And, go ahead, sir.
I have a question about the weapons to wildlife concept you brought up. Is there any history of lands that have been converted from weapons facilities to wildlife facilities and then those wildlife facilities being sold off to commercial and residential
We can.
uses?
Oh yes, definitely right here. They're not far from here. Rocky Mountain,
The
Arsenal. National Wildlife Refuge. There's a development on that. If you go to the $500,000 house, I talked to the realtor there. She said, oh no, this was never part of the arsenal, but it was. They call it Stapleton. So yes, very close to here. We also have weapons to wildlife in the Rocky Mountain Arsenal National Wildlife Refuge. It's very different from Rocky Flats. It was not nuclear. So there was chemical weapons. The health risks, the health effects from that are more immediate, and there was cleanup there. We're talking at Rocky Flats. We're talking particles with a half-life of more time than any human can possibly imagine. So those contaminants at Rocky Flats will be there forever.
I have a question. Bonnie, I'm not really sure on this, but CSMRI, Colorado School of Mines Research Institute, 58th and McIntyre. Half of it was declared a Superfund site, which contributed waste to Rocky Flats because it was radioactive, and the other half was built out as a condo complex.
Right, there's
Also,
another one.
Coors Porcelain was right there. They did Project Pluto.
Right.
And they had radioactive batteries and whatnot for satellites there.
And their waste went to Rocky Flats.
Exactly.
I'd like to speak just a little, as the physician, or at least one of them in the group.
Introduce yourself.
Oh, my name is Sasha Stiles. I'm a adjunct professor of the Department of Environmental Policy and Management at University of Denver. We're doing research on the health concerns in coordination with the Downwinders related to nuclear issues. But also, I'm a member of PSAR, Physicians for Social Responsibility, which now is developing a full chapter in Colorado specifically to discuss the new issues of fracking that have come up, and also to reconsider all the issues surrounding Rocky Flats. And I also work as a consultant to atomic advocacy groups, and have been able to review in that respect records from workers from the Rocky Flats plant, and I am a resident of Superior, and I will tell you, on all accounts, the more I learn, the more I am devastated and outraged by what the communities at large have not known about the health of our fine workers, and also the disability and the potential continuing disability to everyone as a downwinder or a almost downwinder that lives in Superior. It is profound, it is continuing, it is not just continuing in the multiple health effects we know that Tiffany's group and others have found in the downwind population, the cancers, also in the animal populations that we've heard of. And also, my field is epigenetics, which means I've researched the genetic vulnerability in this generation, past generations, and in the next, based on hopefully some of the things we'll be able to find out from the current lawsuit. I realize that the scope has to be what are we going to be able to learn to help our situation stay healthy for the time to come. A lot of the devastation has already happened and is continuing to happen, and as a physician, I have a heartfelt need and responsibility to look at the past, the present, and the future in terms of the health of our community and anybody who travels here. For them to know what a Superfund site is, what it can still do. Just the other day, we were driving past the refuge, and we saw a bunch of horse trailers, so that, horses that were brought and were being brought into the refuge. And my first thought is, oh my God, I hope that those people who have those horses are not then coming back to my neighborhood, which was less than 2 miles away from that. A lot of that is stuff I know, a lot of it that I don't know, and I hope this current lawsuit will help us know what we need to know so that we can protect our communities in the future.
I think that's when you asked earlier about why should Greater Colorado care. One of the strong concerns expressed by the local communities is the tracking of contamination off the refuge. Through the greenway, through the bicycle trails, from car tires.
And I am here on behalf of 7
And
concerned
that's unfamiliar.
After I told everyone to quiet their phones.
about the safety of our
I'd like to mention, every time they break ground and every time they want to burn vegetation, they are re-exposing everybody in the vicinity and downwind. When does the wind not blow at Rocky Flats? It's everywhere. And we've been exposed enough.
Are any of you at all aware of how the shutdown is affecting this area? I
That's
mean, I know in
a great
national
question.
parks, there's no one there, so there's trash building up, but here,
There is a lack of monitoring. Every time they've broken ground in CANDELAS and for the trails, there's been no monitoring of any kind. That's irresponsible.
Yeah, I'd like to sort of stay away from the current compliance issues. I don't really actually have an answer for you about, I know the Fish and Wildlife Service is on furlough. They've said it on their site that there's no one monitoring what's going on in the refuge itself. There is no monitoring on the refuge. There is monitoring of water, theoretically, on the Superfund site itself in the center. The COU has monitoring in place. I'm not familiar with what DOE decisions have been made during the shutdown for monitoring of that. There's also ongoing management and maintenance of issues, related to places like the original landfill where we have slumping, and emissions from that. We really haven't heard, I really honestly don't know the answer to that question, but I'm happy to look into it for you. Other questions? Other things we've not said? We are excited. We pulled a judge this morning. Our judge is Louis Babcock. He has experience in this area. I haven't, because of other commitments this morning, haven't looked at the history here, but everyone's, I think we're excited to have a judge assigned. We have a schedule coming up. It's good to be getting started at this level.
I have something to say on Rocky Flats.
Ted Ziegler, please go ahead.
I worked at Rocky Flats March of 1982 to June of 95 when I retired. And shortly after hiring on with Rockwell International, which was the second contractor, major contractor, I became interested in safety issues, contamination, and I worked on the end of the plant that they call the cold end of the plant. Was not in the radiological end, but I did have experience on touring the plant in the radiological end. Plutonium is not the only contamination on the plant site, and I have retained many documents and provided many documents to other sources. And the correspondence right from the Top Gun Department of Energy throughout 3 major contractors that I worked for. There was no conduct of operation on the plant site that maintained a consistent quality of safety on the plant site. There was no consistent way of doing business relating to safety. I have proof of that. As correspondence proof with the major contractors, Department of Energy, and industrial hygiene, and also with the details that we're confronting today with our leaders in Colorado. And not only our leaders, but our community people that are in control of what happens on Rocky Flats. CANDELAS is a good illustration. This was pre-planned before Rocky Flats even closed on CANDELAS, and it didn't happen overnight. I have documentation that will illustrate the burial sites, the spray fields, maps. There is layers and layers, 30-foot deep on that plant site, with just about any type of contamination you want to put on the plant site. It was easy, the disposal for the contractors. And the downwinders, we're talking about contamination on the downwinders. I have tried repeatedly, and so has John Lipsky and other organizations tried to get soil sampling. The contamination is in the soil on Rocky Flats, and it reaches the surface no matter what we try to avoid. It reaches the surface through burrowing animals, worms, you name it. And for example, worms are discrete. Their weight every time, 24 hours, they come up to the surface, their body weight. So do other burrowing animals. I visited CANDELAS, right at the fence line of the CANDELAS area, and there's feces from deer along that trail on the south side of Rocky Flats, and those animals eat the vegetation on Rocky Flats, which is contaminated, and it's a source of not only contamination to the children in that CANDELAS that will be playing on that area or venturing into the area. The contamination issues that we've addressed, not only with the Department of Energy, but Colorado Department of Health, have avoided to give us soil sampling. That's where the contamination is. It begins in the soil.
And I think what we're trying with this petition to do is get out of the sampling business for the moment. Sampling, I think, is what got us here. Let's go find what actually we know about where things are buried.
I can show you.
Okay. Thank you, Ted.
Thank you.
Other questions? Other comments? Okay. If you have any concerns or questions later on, feel free to give me a call, or John Lipsky. I can direct you to any of the petitioners who are here. If you have specific questions for them, we will keep you advised as the lawsuit progresses. I expect to know something, depends on the federal shutdown, because it'll affect the courts eventually. But we hope to have some next steps in the next 3 months in terms of scheduling hearing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Can I get a picture?
Who do you want a picture?
Before the plaintiff petitioners all disperse, can I get everybody up here for a picture?
Am I done?
Yeah, and stay on the line, Terry. We need you in the picture. On Skype. So come on this way. Oh, Ted.
This is what the CANDELAS people have to sign and have it notarized to buy a home.
Can I have this copy?
Will you grab that filing for Pat to hold up? If that's okay? Just one.
Awesome, thank you.
I don't know if you're going to turn out very good.
You know, we should get a few people sitting. Can we